This video serves as the introduction to Module 9, in which we discuss how markets became integrated in a broader sense across time and space. By integrating markets, what we mean is that markets become connected such that prices can reach their true level. The prices can become equal across time and space. Thus, we'll be discussing both finance in the first half, and then in the second half, transportation and communication. So as a brief introduction to both of these subjects, let me say the following. Studying finance these days, I know, it carries a lot of baggage, but all we mean is how money can be moved across time and across people's different preferences for risk. That's what we mean when we talk about the financial market. So thus we're going to discuss what kinds of devices have been devised in order to facilitate this kind of exchange across time and risk profiles. We'll especially focus our discussion on short and medium-term financing because those were problems that tended to be solved earlier in human history. Long-term financing is a pretty difficult problem to solve in almost any context. We'll also discuss what I would call practical matters, which are transportation and communication. These are the technological means through which markets can become integrated, that goods can be transported across wide geographic areas, and now information can be communicated in order to equalize prices. So we'll be talking about both these notions of physical delivery and exchange of information. And then finally this week, we'll wrap up by discussing some of the consequences of all this market integration in the form of the second industrial revolution, which will have a different geographic scope than we've been discussing before, and also different mechanisms for improving productivity. So once again, I know finance has a lot of connotations for all of us, but when we talk about the financial market, what we really mean is just the market for money. This market exists because of agents' differing preferences. That is really the root of the financial market. If all people were the same and all people thought of the present versus the future as identical, and all people thought of riskless and risky baskets as equal, then there would be no financial market. But people tend to prefer the present to the future, and we tend to prefer less risky lotteries to risky lotteries. And furthermore, people have different preferences over those things and their degree of preference, say, for the present versus the future. And this is going to establish a market. There's a potential to trade the future for the present at some price and risky assets for risk-free assets, again, at some price. So what financial markets do is they facilitate this exchange, moving money across risk profiles and time for a fee. As a side effect of this, financial markets provide a way for people to use otherwise dormant savings in productive capacities. You can put your savings to work. We will outline really a difference between short and medium-term financial transactions and long-term financial transactions. And this is going to give us a way to divide up some of the key ideas in finance. So let's first consider the short and medium-term transactions. For us, what is especially interesting and concerning is the way that firms or other productive entities can buy the inputs they need for production before they realize their output and have any money. This is an interesting problem. So to fix ideas, consider a very simple case, which is the case of a farm. The farmer, to get started, needs to buy the seeds to plant. But the farmer may not have any money to buy the seeds to plant until the harvest is realized. How can that farmer, therefore, move that money from the future to the present in order to plant the seeds? This is common in any industry, where, say, a factory would need to buy its inputs before the output is realized. One important input is paying workers, so that money needs to be moved to the present to pay the workers who need to eat today. All of this necessitates the creation of some kind of mechanism for moving that money across time. Another financial problem encountered by any firm, and especially by the firms in the first industrial revolution and the second industrial revolution that we'll discuss, is the problem of buying a large machine. large machine purchases tend to require long-term financial transactions because it's very difficult to pay off something like that in one shot. Even if you can move money from the future, you have to move a lot of money from the future to the present, many years of output. So how can this be made possible? We'll discuss some ways. And of course, I should mention, some of these financial problems are present in your lives. In our lives, you're going to Middlebury, you're doing well. Maybe someday I'll get promoted and get tenure. I can look in the future and I can see that there's maybe money coming to me in the future. But there are some investments that I might want to make today, like paying for a house, making improvements on the house. When you're in graduate school, you should eat as much as you need to be productive in your training. There are maybe some ways you can move output from the future to the present. And I think, I'm a millennial, and I think you guys are the same way. We have this real taboo against using debt. But sometimes it can be productive to use debt, to use credit, whatever kind of instruments you have available to you, to move some of that money from the future to the present in order to make good investments in your lives. Anyway, that's food for thought. A really interesting thing about studying financial markets in history is that we can't take for granted some of the instruments that we're familiar with using today. So if we think about the pre-industrial financial market, we have to consider an environment that does not have stock exchanges, that doesn't have large banks, where people cannot write checks, there are no checking accounts, there are no savings accounts. There's not a lot of formal loaning going on. That's a very rare thing. There are very few financial services in general. And also markets tended to be really segregated and not integrated. And furthermore, something you really take for granted, the value of a banknote was really unstable. I think this should immediately leave you with a puzzle in your mind, which is, my God, well, how did anything ever get done? That's crazy. Okay, let's hold on to that puzzle and let's make it even worse. Okay, there was an additional obstacle to getting anything done in pre-industrial economies, which was, especially in Europe, a widespread prevalence of what were called usury laws. These come from a religious foundation, so Judeo-Christian religions generally have prohibitions against unreasonable interest charges. This is called usury. And by the way, there are still such a thing as usury laws in the United States. These are laws that prohibit unreasonably high interest rates. But usury in the pre-industrial economy was a broader idea. In some places, any interest payment was forbidden altogether. Okay, now interest is often the fee that's required for moving money across time. But if you want to give someone a loan or move money from the future to the present in some way, usually there's a fee attached. And these were, in many places, forbidden. Furthermore, there were guilds, in many cities especially, that controlled prices and wages and also specifically mandated what could be allowable interest charges. And those might be lower than what might be required to move money across time in a given good way. So this sets up an important puzzle for us. Okay, the lack of financial services and also in many places usury laws that prohibited the kind of interest fees that we might have expected. Now, in the case of usury laws, there were ways to get around them, I should say. It was illegal to rewrite the principle of a loan, but people did it. What they would tend to do is create service charges or other kinds of charges that wouldn't look like interest in order to get around this. But most broadly, there's an instrument that existed that was used in order to get things done. It was incredibly common. It was probably the most important financial instrument in existence before the 20th century, and I bet you've never heard of it. It was called the Bill of Exchange. Bills of exchange were precursors of modern-day checks, but they were a lot more complex and a lot more flexible. They were the financial instrument that got things done in the Mediterranean trade, the Atlantic trade, small payments in the Industrial Revolution, and we can go on and on and on. Bills of exchange can function like IOUs, they can function like loans, and they can become used like money themselves. They're broadly applicable and really flexible. They're really interesting, and we're going to spend quite a lot of time talking about them because of their complexity. First, let me just give you a hint. As a simple definition, they're a written note that orders someone to be paid on a specific date. The magic of the bill of exchange is that this simple structure, plus a few other interesting features, made these things tradable across wide distances and usable in a lot of different contexts. So that's where we're going now.